This episode was dedicated by Charles Mitchell to his father Tom. More on that later on. April 6, 1945. The Allies have been moving closer to the Japanese home islands, step by bloody step across the Pacific and the South Seas. And this week comes the next step. This week, they invade Okinawa. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Soviets advanced up and down the Eastern Front, and the Allies broke out from the Rhine in force in the West. The Battle of Iwo Jima ended, a Japanese offensive in China kicked into gear, and the preliminaries got going for the Allied invasion of Okinawa, and that invasion happens this week. On April 1st, Easter Sunday, Operation Iceberg begins. This is the largest Allied naval operation in the Pacific so far. 1,300 warships and transports get into position off the west coast of Okinawa. Richmond Turner gives the signal for the landing force to land, and 4 divisions of U.S. Army and Marines hit an 8-kilometer arc of beach. Here's the thing, though. Everyone has assumed the opposition will be pretty ferocious. They're even sending in extra medical teams with the first assault waves. And they figure it'll take 3 days to take even the 2 nearest airfields. But the first wave drives their Amtraks up the beach just after 8:30 a.m. to zero opposition. By 10:30, they've taken both of those airfields. Now, they have made a diversionary landing on the eastern side of the island. Could that have drawn off the entire Japanese force? Also, it is April Fool's Day, but no. Turner writes to Pacific Fleet Commander Chester Nimitz at noon. Practically no fire against boats, none against ships, considerable number of tanks and artillery landed, regimental reserve now landing, troops advancing inland standing up. So this is not at all a bloodbath like Peleliu or Iwo Jima. In fact, with no opposition, this is a very successful operation, with 60,000 men landing this day, and with most of their tanks and artillery, and loads of supplies. Well, it's a successful operation for the landing troops, but not for the ships landing them, because 700 planes, like half of them kamikazes, fly out of Kyushu that morning, and one kamikaze damages 5th Fleet Commander Ray Spruance's flagship Indianapolis badly enough that she has to limp away for repairs. 200 Japanese planes are shot down, but 3 destroyers, 2 ammo transports, and an LST are sunk, and a bunch of other ships damaged. Kamikazes also target the British warships patrolling 500 kilometers to the south, but their armored carrier decks prove way more resilient than the wooden ones of the American carriers we recently saw knocked out of action. But the Okinawa beachhead at the end of day 1 is nearly 14 kilometers wide and over 4 deep in places. The 4 assault divisions report total casualties of 28 dead, 104 wounded, and 27 missing this day. By the end of April 3rd, both captured airfields are usable. On the 3rd, the 1st Marine and 7th Infantry Divisions reach the east coast. The 6th Marine Division heads north and secures Ishikawa Isthmus the 4th. They are in positions they genuinely thought it would take 2 weeks to reach. Where is the enemy? The supply buildup continued and more support units landed. Empty transports departed, and each night the fleet dispersed. Hundreds of civilians were rounded up and interrogated. The information gleaned was sketchy and conflicting, but a picture emerged of a general Japanese withdrawal to the south prior to D-Day. From the 4th, the 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions attack southward. They do finally meet some resistance the last couple days of the week, taking a few ridges, but being halted today. As for the north, today the 29th and 4th Marine Regiments launched drives northward up the west and east coast respectively. We'll see what happens with them next week, I guess. On the 3rd, Japanese Prime Minister Kuniaki Koiso says the Americans will be driven from Okinawa and the Japanese will retake Saipan. He is forced to resign several days later, though, and Kantaro Suzuki is appointed by Japanese Emperor Hirohito to find an honorable way for Japan to end the war. Now, if there was some sort of automatic correcting feature when typing these reports on my typewriter, it would tell me that his name is supposed to be Kangaroo Suzuki. Perhaps one day there will be such a feature. In the meantime, I think Kangaroo Suzuki is joining Jose Paulus in our canon of nicknames. Something else here, though. When Hirohito was told recently that kamikaze attacks were to be sent to fight the incoming Okinawa invasion force, he asked, what was the Navy doing? Were there no more ships? So the Navy felt pressured to do something, and that something is Operation 10 Go, involving Yamato, the world's largest battleship, a light cruiser, and 8 destroyers. Make no mistake, Yamato is going on a suicide mission. Combined Fleet Commander Soemu Toyoda has ordered out the remnants of his fleet. Mighty Yamato is to strike the American invasion fleet, just driving right through it and sinking as many transports as possible until she runs aground, where whoever is still alive of her 2,000 crewmen will join the Okinawa defenses, and Yamato will fight as a shore battery. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito is leading this attack, and his orders are, fight gloriously to the death and completely destroy the enemy fleet. He went ahead and prepared for the operation, but he has in fact refused to order it carried out. He thinks it's a waste of men, and a futile one at that. He is not alone in this, but Ryunosuke Kusaka, Combined Fleet Chief of Staff, flies to Tokuyama where the ships are assembled on the 5th to convince Ito and the other Combined Fleet commanders to get on with it. Well, most of them are only hearing of it for the first time that day, and they are against it. But they are told this will divert Allied planes away from the planned kamikaze attacks against the U.S. ships at Okinawa, and the Emperor expects the Navy to do its part to defend the island. They relent. Now, supposedly the ships only have enough fuel to reach Okinawa, so there's to be no second chance. But Russell Spur says in A Glorious Way to Die that in defiance of that order, the ships are given just about all the fuel the port has left, but it's still not likely enough to allow Yamato to make it back to Japan. So, do we see one final clash of naval titans? We do not. Decoded radio signals both the 5th and today tell the Americans what's going on. The Japanese fleet sets off today at 4 p.m. They are sighted by American subs heading through the Bungo Channel. Now, tomorrow morning, whoa, the future, Spruance orders Mortondeo's Task Force 54, a battleship force, to intercept them. But this is preempted by Mark Mischer's Task Force 58, the fast carrier force, who launch a massive airstrike without telling Spruance until after the launches are done. Nearly 400 planes are launched, and they catch Yamato and company half-past noon, around 270 kilometers south of Kyushu. Waves of both regular and torpedo bombers spend 2 hours pummeling Yamato, and though she and her escorts fight back as best as they can, it is an overwhelming attack. And at 2:23 p.m., Yamato capsizes, though the over 24 hits she's taken means she was already sinking. 3 minutes later, she blows up in an explosion so big it can reportedly be heard 200 kilometers away. The light cruiser is also sunk, but 4 of the destroyers do manage to escape the carnage and make it to Sasebo. The Japanese lose roughly 4,000 men dead. The US, 12, with 10 planes shot down. But hey, the Japanese powers that be were not kidding when they said that this would distract American air power from the fleet off Okinawa, nor that that's when the kamikazes will strike. Now, from mid-March, Toyota's 1st Special Attack Force had over 1,800 planes based on Kyushu and Formosa, and there have been since then, as we've seen, kamikaze attacks, and costly ones for the Americans at that. The attacks today and tomorrow on the fleet off Okinawa are the first Kikusui kamikaze operation. There are many more planned. Next month, we will have a special that covers these operations in detail, since I won't have much time to do it justice in these regular episodes. The Japanese army is also attacking this week in China. The fight for Nanjing, which exchanged hands several times last week, continues. On the 4th, after days of heavy fighting, it falls once again to the Japanese. But guess what? Here's a spoiler. Chinese 180th and 179th Divisions launch heavy counterattacks, and the Japanese will abandon it and withdraw back to their starting position at Jingmen. The Japanese are planning to launch another offensive in China, though, in western Hunan. This is to take another Chinese airfield and also to consolidate their railway traffic. They've been building highways, actually, in the area beginning a week or 2 ago, and by now have some 80,000 troops under 20th Corps Commander Ichiro Anzai. it will likely be a couple of weeks before the main forces actually engage each other. It is true that the Japanese are being attacked this week in Burma. On the 31st, units from British 36th Division and Chinese 6th Army take Kyaukme. The Burma road from Lashio to Mandalay is now cleared of the enemy. There's a change of plans in Burma this week, though. It seems Operation Dracula is being revived. This, if you remember, was an airborne and amphibious assault plan to hit Rangoon that was shelved last year. Theater Commander Louis Mountbatten now revives it. Even while Slim and the 14th Army were achieving stunning victories in central Burma, the Supreme Commander was still not convinced this was the way to subdue the country, and continued to hanker after his personal obsession, amphibious operations, which would, after all, make him, not Slim, the real conqueror of Burma. Bill Slim, for his part, is happy for all the help 14th Army can get, worried about Japanese suicide squads maybe holding Rangoon until the monsoons come. That's usually in mid-May. His men are really starting their advance south just now, but the humidity is crippling, so Mountbatten announces that Dracula has returned from the dead April 2nd, and the assault on Rangoon, featuring a full airborne division, will go off no later than May the 5th. So Slim is now racing both the monsoon and the amphibious 15th Corps. He orders 33rd Corps to sweep diagonally back and forth across the country, while 4th Corps is to dash to the south for Rangoon. A dash that began last week comes to its finish this week over in Western Europe. As last week ended, elements of U.S. 1st Army raced ahead into the heart of Germany south of the Ruhr and then wheeled northward. Their plan is to link up with U.S. 9th Army, who were heading east north of the Ruhr, and then surround the enemy in a Ruhr pocket. They hit some stiff resistance heading for Paderborn last week, but now keep on coming and bypass Paderborn as the week gets going, now heading west towards Lippstadt. At Lippstadt on April 1st, once again, Easter Sunday. The lead elements of 1st and 9th Armies make contact just past noon. Walter Model's Army Group B, composed of the 5th Panzer and 15th Armies, which is 7 corps, 19 divisions with headquarters and support, is now surrounded in a pocket 50 kilometers by 120. There are also 26 German generals in there, and even an admiral. The Germans have been completely outfoxed. While the Americans maneuvered, Model and his army group sat still. Here's a litany of reasons why. Half-strength divisions, low fuel, Allied command of the air, morale collapse among the rank and file, and of course, the refusal of the Führer, Adolf Hitler, to countenance even the smallest tactical retreat. Model was caught in a perfect storm of military disaster. But one other fact deserves mention. The blistering tempo of the American rush had forced German headquarters on all levels to flee their posts or dive for cover. This is true. Almost straight off, Model lost contact with 15th Army Commander Gustav Adolf von Saingen, so he thought he'd been captured or killed. This was not the case, but von Saingen couldn't get hold of Model. So while he was getting his guys together in a new defensive line, Model appointed a new commander for 15th Army and ordered a counterattack. So it's pretty easy to see why a lot of soldiers were really confused. Model has by today realized the hopelessness of his position. Hitler says stay and fight to the last, and says 12th Army is coming to the rescue, and there are new super weapons coming. But Model is aware that this is all a fantasy, and the Americans by today have 4 full corps on the perimeter of the pocket. 9th Army, by the way, has now been restored to Omer Bradley's 12th Army Group. Also in the west, on March 31st, the French 1st Army begins crossing the Rhine near Speyer. There's another Allied operation in the works in Italy. The Big Spring Offensive, Operation Grapeshot, is soon to begin. The Allies have some 17 divisions and 8 independent brigades, and the Axis, 21 German and 4 Italian divisions, which seems even, or even maybe in the Axis' favor, but it is misleading. See, the German divisions are way under strength by now, and 3 of the 4 Italian divisions are in the Ligurian army guarding the flank facing France. So the actual Allied combat strength is over 900,000 men to the Axis combat strength of around 400,000. The Axis also have 100,000 or so Italian police. I went over the phases and objectives a couple of weeks ago. This week, there are diversionary attacks at the far left and far right of the front to try to draw off Axis force, starting with Operation Roast, a commando operation, the first and second, to take Porto Garibaldi and the isthmus by Lake Comacchio. Today begin the preliminaries to the main event, a heavy artillery bombardment of the Senio River positions. There is an even bigger preliminary bombardment going on this week over in East Prussia, hitting Königsberg. This goes on for much of the week, even though the weather is nothing but fog and rain. 3rd Belarusian Front Commander Alexander Vasilevsky knows he cannot delay his attack though, whatever the weather, even if he must rely solely on artillery and not the massive force of air power that's been assembled. He has just under 140,000 men in 4 armies, which is roughly the same number of men the Germans have in Königsberg, but Vasilevsky also has 5,000 big guns and mortars, 538 tanks and self-propelled guns, and nearly 2,500 planes, should he get the chance to use the latter. And hey, those artillery pieces, nearly half are high-caliber guns, with some up to 305 millimeters. Today, the 6th, though, the weather clears, and the Soviets are off to the races, hitting Königsberg from 8 separate points, even as the artillery pounds the city and Soviet planes begin to join in as the weather further clears throughout the day. By the evening, they have assault units in the city itself, they've cut the railway line to Pillau, and the city defense system is pretty shaky. They do not halt their attacks as darkness comes, since Vasilevsky has ordered all his units to keep up the fight all night long. As the week ends, things look dark for the Germans in Königsberg. To be fair, they look dark for the Axis forces along the entire Eastern Front. Sopron falls to Fyodor Tolbukin's 3rd Ukrainian Front April 1st, and that's the last Hungarian town of any significance to fall to the Soviets. They're already crossing the Austrian border. Rodion Malinovsky's 2nd Ukrainian Front is closing in on Bratislava in Slovakia, and the Red Army is going to aim for Vienna from 2 directions by 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian fronts. The orders for this go out the first from Stavka. Stavka actually sends out further orders to 3rd, synchronizing the operations of all 4 Ukrainian fronts. The issue here is the lack of progress by 4th in its recent offensive. Stavka gives its commander, Andrei Yeremenko, immediate objectives in a new operation of taking Opava and Moravska Ostrava, followed by an attack towards Olomouc to link up with the right wing of Malinovsky's front. Since they're not taking any chances, Yeremenko's front is reinforced up to 265,000 men, 6,000 big guns and mortars, and 300 tanks and self-propelled guns. So Yeremenko prepares his assault, but Malinovsky and Tolbukin are still on the move. Malinovsky's assault on Bratislava goes off the morning of the 4th. By 6 p.m., the German garrison has abandoned the city. Josef Tisso's government flees to Austria. Tolbukin is racing for Vienna along multiple axes. Now, the defenses in the city are nothing like those serious ones we saw in Buda and Pest. The Red Infantry pushes in from the east, while the Soviet armor tries to swing around to the west, but they do meet some stiff resistance. Hitler has sent down the 25th Panzer Division and the Führer Grenadier Division as reinforcements. The city itself is on fire from American bombing raids. Baldur von Schirach, Gauleiter of Vienna, declares Vienna a fortress city and gets the locals working on suburban defenses like trenches and anti-tank barriers. Those locals are not exactly enthusiastic about this, though. You know, a fight to the absolute finish and the destruction of their city. There is also an Austrian resistance movement, codenamed 05, or 05, and their plan is to avoid such a scenario. And they've actually made contact with Soviet command, who are very suspicious. However, on the 5th, the Soviet advances stop, and this is what they were asking for. It is not, however, their pleas, but German resistance that has slowed things down. And as the day wears on, Tolbukin's forces reignite their campaign. 4th Guards Army to hit the east and southeast sectors of the city, 9th Guards Army from the south, and to flank Vienna from the west, 6th Guards Tank Army to attack northward around the city and cut off any escape from the city to the northwest, and then to attack the city itself from the west with Ninth Guards Army. Stavka actually orders Malinovsky to help out and have 46th Army outflank the city from the north. This morning, April 6th, the assault on Vienna begins. It is brutal and bloody, but the Soviets are taking heavy losses, and as the week ends, they cannot fight their way into the city center. However, their attacks have had another effect. When Army Group South Commander Otto Wöhler is ordered by Hitler to counterattack the Soviet flanks and not try to oppose them head-on, he says they're in no shape for counterattack, and they have to put something in front of the Soviets to stop them from driving into the infinite. He is relieved of his command. Lothar Rendulitz will arrive tomorrow to take command, although that's not exactly quite what's going on. See, Army Group Ostmark is formed by Hitler in Austria this week from what's left of Army Group South, which is kind of a redesignation, but that's what Rendulitz takes control of, anyhow. Those two divisions Hitler sent to Vienna, by the way, come from Army Group Vistula and represent half of its armor. And that is the force that's supposed to protect Berlin. It seems like Hitler still doesn't really believe an attack on Berlin is in the cards. He sends orders to Army Groups North and Courland to continue to remain where they are and tie down the enemy and block the Baltic ports. This week, on the 3rd actually, the 6th Courland battle ends. And though that army group is badly weakened, they will continue to hold on. Hey, in recent episodes, I've talked a bunch lately about the various machinations among British, American, and Soviet leaders concerning Italy, right? Joseph Stalin actually cabled Franklin Roosevelt at the end of last week on March 29th, saying that German divisions were leaving Italy for the Eastern Front and that something must have happened to provoke this. Roosevelt again tells Stalin that no negotiations have taken place about a German surrender in Italy, and that those two divisions were in fact sent to the Eastern Front long before any contact ahead of such theoretical negotiations was even made. Stalin writes back to Roosevelt now on the 3rd that there have indeed been negotiations in Bern. My military colleagues are sure that negotiations did take place and that they ended in an agreement with the Germans whereby the German commander on the Western Front, Marshal Kesselring, is to open the front to the Anglo-American troops and let them move east, while the British and Americans have promised, in exchange, to ease the armistice terms for the Germans. I realize there are certain advantages resulting to the Anglo-Americans, seeing that the Anglo-American troops are enabled to advance into the heart of Germany almost without resistance. But why conceal this from the Russians? And why were the Russians, their allies, not forewarned? A very physically ill Roosevelt has George Marshall write back a strong rebuttal of these charges on the 5th. Churchill also writes one, but it is a tense situation, to say the least. And the week comes to its end, with Japanese attacks on the ground in China, from the skies off Okinawa, American landings unopposed on Okinawa, Yamato making its last run, hundreds of thousands of Germans surrounded in the Ruhr, the fight on for Vienna and Königsberg, and Stalin and Roosevelt cabling about Soviet suspicions. There's also this. You know, Dwight Eisenhower wrote to Stalin last week about his plans, right? Stalin answers Eisenhower's telegram from last week this week on the 1st. He says Eisenhower's plans for cutting Germany in two, instead of an American or British drive on Berlin, fit entirely with his own plans. And a meeting of Western and Eastern forces in the area near Leipzig and Dresden works great. So the Soviets will also attack in that direction. He even writes, Berlin has lost her strategic importance, and says, for that reason, the Soviets will only send secondary attacks towards Berlin, and all the Soviet offensives will be launched during the second half of May. But remember last week Stalin's warning about bluffs? Yeah, well, as we also saw last week, Georgy Zhukov is currently in Moscow, and the reason he's there is to present plans A and B for an offensive aimed towards Berlin. Ivan Konyev joins him the 31st, and they have a general staff conference. And on April 1st, the day Stalin writes to Eisenhower that Berlin is not a major objective and the Soviet offensives will begin in late May, Soviet plans and preparations are being finalized for a huge Soviet offensive aimed directly at Berlin to begin no later than April 16th and to reach its conclusion in 12 to 15 days. As I said at the beginning, this episode was dedicated by Charles Mitchell to his father, Tom. When the war started, Tom was 18 years old and living in Cape Town, South Africa. He defied his mother, cheated on his eye test, and joined the Umvoti Mounted Rifles. He ended up driving a truck from Cape Town to the East African Campaign, and then up to Cairo for the Battle of El Alamein. After El Alamein, he went back to South Africa on leave. There he met Patty, the woman he would later marry. Then it was back to war, landing in Italy with the 6th South African Armored Division. The fighting here was far more destructive and deadly as Tom advanced up the spine of Italy with British 8th Army. On June 6, 1944, he was one of the first Allied soldiers in Rome. Shortly after that, Tom's war ended when he was wounded in a mortar barrage and repatriated to South Africa for treatment. That's where he is now, April 1945, in the weekly timeline. Back home, he was reunited with Patty, and they marry in 1947. Many years later, Tom writes up his wartime experiences, but never quite finishes. Charles decides to complete what Tom started and produces this book, Tom's War. Producing this book helped Charles understand his father, his parents, and that whole generation a little better. In fact, Charles would like to dedicate this memorial not just to his father, but to all the South African men of that age, for this is their story, as well as Tom's. In order to remember those that were once remembered, now forgotten, Charles asked us to read a short passage from the book. These are Tom's words after being wounded in Italy. When George Fordor, our Padre's assistant, visited me in hospital a month or so later and told me what had happened in the subsequent battles, my frustration was replaced by a deep void that can never be filled. Men like Johnny Emmett, Johnny Waters, Neil Hunter, Oscar Strauss, Tippi Odendahl, and so many others can never be replaced. If you would like to memorialize an episode of this series, you can do so by joining the Time Ghost Army at Brigadier level for 1 year or by making a one-time donation. You can join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.